The remedy. The remedy. What's underneath the situation you don't realize? So let's examine with a critical eye. Put on your glasses and let it magnify the truth that lies hidden under all those lies. Cause everybody has nobility, and if you look beyond what your eyes can see, you'll see they're just like you and me, and now we're giving you the remedy. Welcome to the Remedy Podcast. This podcast is a project of WEBB Squared, a North Carolina nonprofit that works to increase wealth for Black businesses through connection, network, and opportunity. Our host is Stephanie Terry, the Executive Director of WEBB Squared, and our co-hosts are Associate Director Rinnie and myself, Mashallah Salaam. I am the Media and Production Specialist. In this podcast, we hope to bring consciousness to the racial divide and speak on emerging new narratives about race. Thanks for joining us today. We hope you will enjoy the podcast.
Hey, y'all.
Hey, Stephanie.
Hey.
Hey, Mashallah. How are you guys?
Everybody?
It's Podcast Tuesday.
It's finally Podcast Tuesday
I know.
and not Podcast Friday or Wednesday night.
I know, right? It's been a while since we've actually met in person and have been in each other's presence and company.
Yeah. How y'all doing?
Tired.
You tired, Mashallah?
Yeah.
What, you worked late last night?
Yeah.
Really? Till
Yeah.
what time?
It was like throughout the night, so
Oh, that's why you're dragging.
yeah.
I was wondering why you were being extra deliberate this morning.
How about you?
Oh my God.
You had your booster
I
yesterday.
had my booster and I was sweating all night and shivering and popping Tylenols, trying to wake Michael up who was just dead to the world.
I guess I'm the only one that got sleep last night.
Yeah.
I crashed at 7 o'clock last night,
Oh,
and I
wow.
didn't wake up till 4 o'clock in the morning.
That's some
That's
good. That's
what,
good deep
9,
sleep.
10 hours of sleep?
Yeah. So anyway, then I woke up in the middle of the night and I was reading all about narcissism and psychopaths.
Whatever for.
You know, everything's about race with me. We'll get into that. What are we talking about today?
Well, we wanted to spend some time talking about our emotions and what do they have to do with the mind and the mindset. And then one of the questions came up as we were talking about this is like, how does trauma, either personal and collective, inform the mindset for our culture and our as individuals?
Emotions and trauma and the mind and the mindset?
I know. And how does it affect us personally and collectively?
Of course it does. We just need to figure out how.
Yeah.
So who wants to share about their crazy emotions that messes with your mind?
Well, I always share about anxiety and, depression. Just it's weird to always be in an anxious state of mind and feel like I'm not getting enough done or I don't have enough of this.
I think anxiety is one of the worst emotions that you can feel on a consistent basis. It's like, I don't know about y'all, but it shuts me down.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like the thoughts, you have a feeling of anxiety and you don't know if it's coming from the thoughts that you're thinking. If something happened to trigger it and you don't even slow it down enough to, I don't know.
But it goes back to being that program that we talked about. I've done a lot of work in the last couple of years to kind of figure out like why I am the way I am. And there's like some deep, issues that go all the way back to like just childhood, having to anticipate whether I was going to be ridiculed from like one day to the next, not wanting to go to school, not knowing what I was stepping into all the time. And so things like that. And just, I think that those feelings get like programmed into you that even as an adult, things happen and they trigger those like emotions and feelings that you've been holding on to like your whole life.
How many times, I'm thinking about my life, where I have made decisions, emotional decisions, that were completely not rational or logical. And I didn't even realize I was making emotional decisions at the time because they were so powerful. And how many times has that like thwarted something that I really was trying to get accomplished, or just like a plan that I had laid out.
Mm-hmm.
And then some emotional trigger pops up and it just all goes awry.
Mm.
I remember, I don't know how old I was. I read it somewhere, but the gist of what I read was everybody makes emotional decisions. Like, this is not a logical world. It's not, like the decisions that are made are usually emotional.
Mm-hmm.
I just think emotional decisions are made all the time in business, in personal relationships.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
Yeah, I do think that a lot of people do make decisions from an emotional place, and it's really hard to separate ourselves out from emotion sometimes. Like, where's the self begin and the emotions begin? How do we, I don't want to see a society of people who are so stoic that nobody feels anything, because I feel like that would be boring. And I think that there's a lot of great things that come from emotions, art, literature. We use these tools to unpack the deep emotions that are within. And I think there's some beautiful things that arise from being in touch with your emotions. We certainly don't want stoicism across the board, because that would just be dull and boring. But there's a divide in the world, in the country, in our communities, and it's a very emotional divide. And I think a lot of it has to do with that idea of scarcity versus abundance that we talk about a lot, that everybody feels like there's not enough for them. Our emotions keep the divide going, even though it doesn't feel like it's really grounded anything in reality. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
there is a lot that we have enough. We can take care of each other and ourselves if we get out of this scarcity mindset and into a more abundant mindset.
Yeah, but before we can, here comes the race card. Mm-hmm. It's the race card, people. So before we can even get there, though, like, if we use an emotional lens to look at history, what were the emotions driving the decisions? For example, like when race was constructed, when America was constructed, like, what were those emotions? Even though we know they were like business decisions about money, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what were the emotions behind those business decisions around money that allowed for people to completely subjugate and dehumanize? Like, what were those emotions? Mm. And then what were the emotions that, for the people that were subjugated and dehumanized, like, what were those emotions? That was the other half of the arrangement. Like, that's the kind of stuff we don't. I'm not saying, I'm saying we, because I haven't even looked at history with from an emotional, like, psychological lens. Mm. I've always looked at it from, like, okay, these are the facts, and then even how I interpret the facts is very emotional, but I've never emerged that, like, that's what I was doing. I never brought consciousness around it. Mm. You know what I mean?
No.
So, like, let's explore that. Let's put our emotional glasses on. Is there such a thing?
I think we always talk about emotions after the construct, how the construct created trauma, how the construct created subjugation, and then the emotional impact that has on people. But you're right, we don't delve deeply into maybe what those emotions were before the construct. Like, how did we get there?
I feel like it's a lack of emotion if you can just dehumanize a whole people. So I don't know how to really get into that mind or explore that mindset, because I feel like you have to lack emotional intelligence in order to do something like that.
Please define emotional intelligence for us, so we're all talking from the same definitions, because I like that.
Well, for me, it's just about having empathy and being able to put yourself in another person's shoes and to understand that we all feel the same way and that we all experience the same emotions, and to really be aware of that and recognize that, and that what you do could very well come back onto you.
Okay, so that's the definition of emotional intelligence.
Well, that's my definition.
Well, we're going to go with it. We can use that in this. Are you okay with that definition?
That's fine.
Yeah.
So we're talking about empathy mostly and how we relate to other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so basically, the gist of what you're saying, Mashallah, is that you feel like if we were to put emotional lenses on to look at history, then there was a lack of emotional intelligence amongst the people that could subjugate and dehumanize.
Well, that's my belief. Well, because I don't have the ability to really talk to those people and see what they were thinking or how they were feeling. But I feel like when you think of a person who is a sociopath or like a psychopath, they always say that they lack a certain amount of empathy or they don't have empathy for people.
And we always talk about sociopathology and narcissism and stuff as like an individual, but there's also a cultural element of narcissism, a cultural part of sociopathology that is like alive in the collective, that we get away from just the individual narcissist, but like kind of a societal narcissism of, and this is like where, you know, the race construct is like built in. I mean, I saw some reports in the last couple of years. I've had to like unpack my life living under narcissists for many, many years of my life, that like narcissism is on the rise. And I see that it also corresponds with white supremacy on the rise. I mean, under the Obama years, I think a lot of people like was under this illusion that white supremacy was kind of a thing of the past, but obviously it's not, because under the Trump years, it's like kind of reared its ugly head. And I think there's a correlation between the rise of narcissism and the rise of, you know, white supremacy and the alt-right and that kind of thing.
Definitely. I would call it a re-emergence.
A re-emergence.
A re-emergence. Okay. So if our founding fathers were a bunch of psychopathic narcissists, which clinically, I mean, I don't know the clinical definition, but when I've looked up and could see it's the lack of empathy, complete like superiority complexes, feeling like you're better than everybody, masters of manipulation, pathological liars. Wow, that's like the definition of racism. Holy smokes. Okay, so what are the implications of this? If our founding fathers were narcissists and psychopaths and set up a whole government around them. Now let's fast forward. Like there's a whole line of therapists and psychologists that have worked with, analyzed, researched, and treated people that have grown up in like really dysfunctional families, right? So they weren't necessarily narcissists themselves or psychopaths, but they maybe had like parents that were like that, and like maybe it was generations that were like that. And it does something to the child or the children that grow up with that kind of family history. What has that done culturally to us who've inherited this cultural and institutional, and with since in the last 4 or 6 years or so with this re-emergence, like actual factual dysfunction, you know?
I mean, I can tell you what the result is. January 6th, all those people like deciding that the country is no longer what they want it to be, and they're gonna like run the Capitol and storm it and take it over. I mean, that's where we're at. I mean, what happened January 6th isn't over yet. Those people are still out there. I mean, the whole news cycle right now is talking about the findings and stuff of that, and how people were manipulated into reacting that way by some very savvy characters who hang out at the White House, who hang out at the Capitol.
So, okay, let's put on, we've got an emotional lens on, and let's put on therapist hats. So we got therapist hat, emotional lens glasses, and, you know, a white jacket.
Okay.
You know, the white jacket is supposed to mean, ooh, you're an expert. Right?
You're a doctor.
You're a doctor. Okay, so you've got this group of people who have inherited all the dysfunction from a dysfunctional family / collective. Black and white, like, you know, whether it's externalized in terms of like your identity, you prioritize your identity steeped in whiteness, like versus your human beingness. And then for Black people who've internalized this construct, and it comes out in all kinds of sick ways as well, you know? So how do we treat that mindset? How do we get to the human being behind the emotional body that's filled with trauma, and then the patterns of dysfunction from being raised. Like, how do we treat the human being?
You are looking for the remedy. The remedy.
I mean, like, this is like, because this is where we're at. What are we gonna do? You can't, like, cut off your nose to spite your face. Like,
well, let's talk about that in terms of the work we're doing, like why we're doing the work, like why are we creating mindset trainings for people. One of the things that we keep saying is the revolution begins in dialogue, and you've also brought up this idea that people can move past these deep-seated identities when we start like putting projects out there where we're working together.
Yes,
we have a problem and we're solving it together. Bringing people of different cultures together to work on some kind of issue or problem together, that it builds relationships, it builds partnerships, and it builds a way of getting out of this mindset, because people get to know each other on a human level instead of this like, broken level of not getting to know somebody because they're of a different race or a different culture.
Yeah.
I do feel like education is important. I feel like that's the most important thing, because a lot of people have been miseducated, especially, going to school, they teach things a certain way. And I've just learned, well, actually I didn't just learn, but I learned more about the Daughters of the Confederacy and their efforts to create this narrative that the Confederates were, in a way, people to be honored in our country. Mm-hmm. And they tried to make it seem like slavery wasn't that bad, that enslaved people were living decent lives under the slaveholders. Just really switching the whole narrative around. Mm-hmm. And even creating songs to help children remember what they were trying to teach about history and the Civil War. And it was just all wrong, but it really has affected people a lot till this day. And if we don't go back and re-educate people, tell them the truth about history, then they'll keep going with this false narrative.
So, yeah, out of all the things the Daughters of the Confederacy did, besides put up these dogma statues all over the place, but they wanted to ensure that the narrative or the story was like front and center out there, right? Mm-hmm. Because they wanted people to believe it a certain way. And so to me, the power of belief is like, I've always known that the work is for the hearts and minds, right? Because if you can get someone to believe whatever it is that you want them to believe, whatever your agenda is, and then like have like faith in it, like put strong emotion in it, then you've got someone that you can either, control or manipulate, or like is on your side, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And so this, because why is that? Because there's something, this is what we've been talking about the whole time, this consciousness of consciousness, right? There's so much power in having consciousness of consciousness. And part of it, of the power in that, is to be able to assign meaning to things. Like human beings, we are meaning-making machines. And so I don't have an answer or a remedy, but I do know that the work is somewhere hanging out in our belief systems, in our consciousness, our ability to think and choose, and understanding our feelings. Because back to the emotions, if your emotions can be manipulated, you can be controlled. The easiest way to control a whole lot of people is like, how about this? Just like shoot a gun in the air and everybody's gonna run. It's like, fear, right? But what's even a more powerful way to control people than fear? It's something way more powerful.
Is it the opposite? Love?
Yes! Absolutely. That's what everybody wants. Everybody. Like, to belong, to be loved, to be understood. But we rarely use that as a tool, like seeing past the trauma and the dysfunction to what people really want is to be loved and to be understood and to belong. Now, we don't want to use love like in a manipulative way.
No, we don't. And I think that this idea of like belonging and feeling like you need to be a part of something is manipulated into by some very smart people. This is what makes people go into these rabbit holes of conspiracy theories and stuff. Hey, they belong to an inner circle and they're getting their information from some mysterious person called Q. You know what I mean? Like, and they belong. They're part of this, you know, and that's where kind of like a lot of the, you know, it's like, I think creativity is also like, I believe strongly that if we're able to teach people to be creative individuals, they're going to be less likely to go into these rabbit holes and find these communities because they're creating from their heart and their space, and they're giving their gifts back into the world instead of like filling that void with, you know, these spaces where they are manipulated into thinking and belonging to something that's not healthy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that psychopaths and narcissists, you know, use the guise of love, but it's not really love. Mm-mm. You know, they're actually weaponizing hate. And because they're psychopaths and narcissists, it works because they study human nature. Mm-hmm. Like they study how to, you know, understand somebody or find understanding so that they can control them. So it's about doggone time that the good people rise up. I mean, we need to study who we are and understand human nature so we can utilize like the love that we are, the unity, the truth about us. Like we need to stop being, you know, shy about an agenda.
So I think we're going to talk another day about like how we can use the power of love to help people who are suffering from trauma collectively and personally in order to help heal whatever divides are going on internally and in the external cultural world.
Absolutely. And our WEBB Squared powerful mindset workshops and trainings are all about, you know, de-hacking the hacks. You know, because here's the thing. It's like, you know, you can remember we were talking about the mind is like a computer.
Yeah.
And then like the algorithms.
Yeah.
Right? So they're like essentially programs. We can deprogram the programs that are producing the things that we don't want. Mm-hmm. And we can re-emerge or learn some new ways of thinking about ourselves that will produce the outcomes that we actually want. Mm-hmm. You know, that's the wonderful thing about human beings. We're not static. We're a work in progress. Mm-hmm. But we just have to understand where the work is. And the work is not in behaviors. Mm-hmm. You know, we always trying to change behaviors. No, we have to change minds and we have to understand emotions. Mm-hmm. And when we can really sync that and understand it and debug it,
because then the behaviors will change on a more holistic level if they can like see how their emotions and their, you know, programming work. I mean, you can't change the behavior without changing the emotions behind it, or else they're just going to fall back into that behavior again at some point.
Right, because behavior is an effect of a cause. Mm-hmm. Like actions are effects. Thoughts and emotions come before actions. And so, but if we're always focusing on actions, which this is human beings constantly prioritizing material, physical things that we can see, touch, taste, smell, hear, and not really putting enough emphasis on the processes that come before that. Mm-hmm. We're not just physical. And as long as we keep prioritizing that, this is a material world and material, it's a destructive end because eventually it's gonna perish. Mm-hmm. I mean, name something that lasts forever. That's material.
No, I mean, you're right. Absolutely.
Right. You know,
the only thing that maybe could last is just the earth. You know, even that is like up in the air whether it can last forever.
Right. But then there's something imperishable about human beings. That that thing that we can't put out, that consciousness of consciousness, that knowing.
You know, it's interesting that you brought up behaviors, because I heard somewhere that narcissists actually are attracted to empaths and like to surround themselves with empaths because they like to mirror that behavior so that they can appear a certain way in front of people.
Yeah, but they also torture empaths, that's for sure.
Yeah, but remember, we have to remember that narcissism and psychopath is like a dysfunction, right? It's a mental illness. So there's still a human being. It's a human being with a disease of the mind that comes out with like sick emotions, but there's still a human being there. It's like as if it was a bad cancer or something, a physical. But we don't get into mental illness. We don't unpack that. So all I'm saying is, as we wrap up this wacky conversation, is that I think it's high time that we start spending time looking at areas that we normally don't look at about human beings. What do y'all think?
Sounds like a plan.
Yeah. I'm surprised that no psychologist has taken this psychopath narcissism and applied it to white supremacy and racism. Like, that's crazy.
Yeah, I totally believe there's a correlation between the two.
Yeah. And like trauma, like what? Well, we haven't. But I guess you have to diagnose yourself.
So does that mean that racism is a mental illness then, or could be categorized as a mental illness?
Some people get really ticked off.
Or a collective. It's a collective more than it is like a individual illness. It's a collective illness.
Yeah, but it's a mental, you used to call it a soul sickness.
I call it a soul sickness. And I think that we're all infected. I mean, I don't think there's a single person
that hasn't been touched
by it in some level. And, we wake up to that and it's like there's a lot of self-examining to do. It's like, wow, I can't believe how internalized, racism is, and how much as a white person we get away with like ignoring it. Because we live in a white culture, we don't have to unpack that.
Yeah, but it comes, how it comes out? This is totally conjecture because I'm not white, but how I think it comes out? Guilt and anxiety. Like just this, like paralyzing guilt to the point where like, quote unquote, like just good, normal working people can't even talk about race because it's, it's just such a guilt. And guilt is like, so guilt to me, there's three emotions: guilt, shame, and anxiety that are the worst. They're like, they can ravage a human being. These are the worst. I mean, and it's inherited. And, shame is, and anxiety, I don't know. I just went down another rabbit hole.
That's okay. Let's just say our catchphrase. The revolution begins with dialogue, and we will save the conversation for another day.
Say something better. I need to pull me out here.
Okay, what I'm going to say is that we're joined today by Greg, who's been filming us this whole time. So it has made us a little bit nervous, I think, while we're
thank you. Thank you for pulling me out there. I was just like, I was just jumping. I climbed out and then I jumped back in the ground.
In the meantime, the Remedy podcast, we don't have all the answers. We're just working through the questions. We're hoping that our conversations are a way to help you begin your conversations.
Yeah. And the revolution begins with dialogue.
The conversation will continue.
See y'all next week.
This has been a joint podcast of WEBB Squared and Afro Future Productions. For those of you interested in learning more about our work at WEBB Squared, you can find out more at webbsquared.org. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. This is our conscious conversation. We hope you will subscribe today on your favorite podcast platform. Join the Remedy Membership Forum on Patreon to join us monthly for our members-only discussion. That's it for today. Until next week, thanks for listening. What's underneath the situation you don't realize. So let's examine with a critical eye. Put on your glasses and let it magnify the truth that lies hidden under all those lies. Cause everybody has nobility, and if you look beyond what your eyes can see, you'll see they're just like you and me, and now we're giving you the remedy. Remedy.